Welcome into the PFF NFL show. Steve Palazzolo here, along with Sam Monson. Hello to our YouTube friends. That's right, we're recording this over on YouTube. If you guys want to listen to it there as well, be sure to check out the Pro Football Focus YouTube channel, regardless of whether you're going to listen to us there or not. Sam, free agency roundup today. Is that what we're doing? We're rounding up the roundup because we already did a little winners and losers late last week. Be sure to check out that episode. But more stuff happened, so we got to round that up as well.
Yeah, we're just catching you up with the moves that have been made since we last talked about free agency.
So we'll discuss the new moves in free agency. We have to discuss the New York Jets trade with the Indianapolis Colts, the winner and the loser there, or what we think, and this whole positioning and jockeying for the quarterbacks. And then I might even address a little elephant in the room as well later on. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
About PFF grades and, the media and some things. Okay? So we'll go there if we need to. Let's start with what's happened this weekend. Let's start with Tyrann Mathieu going to – we'll get to Richardson in a second. Let's go to Tyrann Mathieu going to the Houston Texans. 1-year deal. I thought it was a surprise when Mathieu got released by the Cardinals, a guy that, is 2 years removed. He's another guy where you say, if you go back to 2015, if we can get him back to that level, it's unbelievable. He was 92.8 that year, but since then has not been as good. He's battled injuries through the last couple of years. What is Houston getting in Tyrann Mathieu?
I understand the releasing him part. I think that made sense for Arizona. They have a built-in replacement already there in Budda Baker, who they drafted last year. I get why they would cut him. I don't really understand why he could only get a 1-year deal out on the marketplace. I mean, he immediately jumped right to the sharp end of our best available free agents list when he was cut. Okay, you do have to go back a little bit to get his best season, but that best season was Defensive Player of the Year kind of caliber. We're not just talking about a guy who was pretty good that year. He was maybe the best defensive player in the game that year.
At a premium position now.
Yeah.
Because we've learned slot receiver, slot corner is a premium position now in today's NFL.
And while he has been worse since that injury, last year he played 1,000 snaps and was pretty good. So he's not all the way back to where he was, but he's still a good player at a premium position and has the potential to get even better, to get to that Defensive Player of the Year kind of caliber. So I don't really understand why you could only get a 1-year prove-it deal, but I like that. I like the deal for both sides because Houston are able to get a guy with all of that potential. And for Mathieu, he does get that shot for the 1-year prove-it deal, and he can come back next year and potentially do get that big deal on the open marketplace if he's able to get anywhere near the playing style or the playing level he was before. For the Texans, it's a great move because he fills a need in that secondary for an impact slot player that can cover guys man-to-man, cover guys in zone, and add to what they have as a pass rusher on the blitz. Against the run, he's an impact player. He is just one of those jack-of-all-trades kind of players who can make an impact everywhere from the slot.
Yeah, play safety on early downs if you want him to. He doesn't have to, but that's how the Cardinals started using him. Houston likes to run a lot of quarters, which is essentially, you've got two safeties playing the same exact role with run responsibility. Mathieu plays the run as well as any, slot corner, I'd say, in the NFL. So yeah, there's a lot to like about that. I do worry at times when I wrote up Mathieu last week and wrote up the strengths and weaknesses. There are some times he just gets smoked in man coverage. So I don't think he's a guy that you just want to line up. As much as we're saying it's a premium position, he's good in the slot, I don't think you want him just lining up in man coverage 40 times a game, covering a shifty slot receiver. He can do it, but I think it's that versatility that makes him special. That needs to get tapped into to maximize his value.
A lot of those plays, though, are when he's in off-man coverage from the slot, which to me is basically a no-win proposition.
They were behind blitzes, too. So the Arizona played – they ran a ton of blitzes. They leave guys on an island. They're not easy plays by any means. I'm just saying you don't want to do that a whole lot with Mathieu.
And when you add the blitz into that, it makes it even tougher because at that point, the slot guy is anticipating certain route combinations. If you have a blitz being sent, you're looking for specific short routes to throw hot off that blitz.
Got to read those hots.
Yeah, so
like John Gruden would say.
He is buying the first move that is shown to him. If a guy even hesitates to the outside, he's trying to jump an out-breaking route to try and get that interception on a hot read coming off the blitz. If they then turn that back upfield, he's screwed. But I don't know that you can blame him for that. I just think that is a move that would kill, or a combination of factors that would kill any defensive back in the NFL. It's just what you expect. It is designed essentially to take advantage of exactly what he's going to do. So I don't have a big problem with that. I think he can cover receivers in man coverage from the slot pretty much as well as anybody else. It's just that position is inherently no win at times for the DB.
Real quick, when he came out of college, I know you're a big Antoine Winfield fan, and I used Antoine Winfield as a comp for him and what he's able to do. Is that fair or unfair, knowing your Winfield fandom?
I think it's fair. He's that kind of player in terms of he's the thing that people always used to say about Winfield, usually after the first tackle in a game where he killed somebody behind the line of scrimmage, it was that Winfield would set the tone for that defense. He was one of the few defensive backs that was capable of setting the tone for a defense. You would run a sweep or a screen or something to his side of the field, and he would just torpedo that play in the backfield, unlike any defensive back. Mathieu can do the same things. He can make plays that you don't expect slot corners to make, and I think that does legitimately set the tone for a defense. When you see, a slot corner out in the backfield just killing any of those kind of big impact plays, regardless of who does them, I think do set a certain tone for a defense and kind of get everybody fired up.
Matthew's always had a knack for making big plays at the right time. All of the plays that I highlighted in the article last week seem to be fourth quarter, overtime, crunch time, forces a lot of fumbles. So he's a playmaker added to the Texans defense. So definitely like the move there. Justin Pugh, former New York Giant offensive lineman, guard/tackle. He's going to Arizona to the Cardinals. They need linemen anywhere. So no matter where they want to put him, guard or tackle, we've been talking positional value left and right on this podcast. So if you want to try him at tackle, great. Good player at both spots. What do you think about Pugh? Coming off his injury-riddled season, but usually when he's healthy, he's a good player.
Yeah, and more than ever, they need offensive line help because now their quarterback is, in theory, Sam Bradford, who was breaking down behind any offensive line. So
at the press conference, I saw something. What was that thing that you sent me? He tore his rotator cuff at the presser?
Signing his contract. That was just a joke, Steve. That didn't.
Oh, that wasn't real?
No.
I didn't even. I thought it was real. I didn't even blink.
No, I can see why you think that.
Because Bradford, he gets hurt a lot. Sam is the joke.
Yeah. So the Cardinals have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. They're going to need to get an awful lot better if they expect Sam Bradford to make it through a season. And I think Pugh's interesting because he is one of those positional, versatile players who has played both tackle and guard. Initially, I think everybody assumed that this was a guy who was a pretty good right tackle and he could be a very good guard. And he started off that way and then kind of came back down to earth. And I suspect he might actually be a guy who's just pretty good either at guard or tackle. I don't know if he's better at one than the other, at which point presumably you keep him at right tackle because it's the more valuable position. But I don't think it's as simple as saying he's a pretty good tackle and a very good guard, and that's the decision you have to make. I think it's easier than that because he's probably just pretty good at either of them. And I think he would represent a pretty massive upgrade for them. In his last two, I think, healthy seasons, or as healthy as he got, he surrendered a total of 45 pressures over those 2 seasons. John Wetzel for the Cardinals last year surrendered 61 pressures in 1 year. So, you're going to cut down a massive amount on the amount of pressure he gives up at least. Now you just need the other spots to fix.
Judging based off the way the depth chart is shaping out right now, they still have DJ Humphries, slotted in at left tackle. Jared Valdir, who they moved over to right tackle. So it does look like Pugh will probably be a guard. They also brought in Andre Smith, to potentially add depth, guard/tackle play late in his career.
I'm already starting to feel sorry for Sam Bradford.
Already?
Yeah.
You got Mike Upati there, too, who's definitely more of a run blocker than pass blocker, and A.Q. Shipley at center. So they're doing what a lot of teams do at other positions. It's throwing a lot, see what sticks over there.
I mean, Pugh should be a significant upgrade, but that line needs an overhaul. And so far, they're 1/5 of the way there.
It does. It does feel like Arizona's in more of a rebuilding mode, but Pugh is also a guy I think he's a part of that with this long-term deal. 2 years in the high 70s in PFF grades, 2 years in the 80s. So, again, when he's healthy, he's a good player. Let's go to Tampa Bay. 2 moves to report on. It's Ryan Jensen, the center, to Tampa Bay. I'm not gonna read your notes that you sent me earlier today. I'm not going to read your notes. I'll let you
remember what my note was.
It was LOL. I just read it.
Okay.
It was LOL. You didn't like it. You thought it was a little bit too much money.
Well, he's now the best paid center in the league for a guy who is average.
So guys that are in the league, it's a premium position now. The entire offensive line is just this big premium position. This is how the NFL's looking at it. Nobody trusts their ability to draft and develop. Everybody thinks that the college game's ruining the NFL game, so you just got to pay guys that you've seen do it at the NFL level. There's no way you can draft a guy and he'd ever be good. That's where we're attacking this thing from right now.
Right? Knowing what you know about how teams deal with free agency, how many Ryan Jensen games do you think the Tampa Bay Bucks are basing their evaluation off?
4 to 6.
Because if you chose the right 4 games, you could come away with the opinion that Ryan Jensen is an all-pro.
Best center in 4 games.
If you chose the wrong 4 games last season, you could easily come away with the opinion that Ryan Jensen doesn't deserve a place on an NFL roster.
What's that one big game? I'm looking at your premium stats page right here.
Oakland. So absolutely crushed the Oakland Raiders defensive front, almost all in the run game, though he didn't allow any pressure in that game. That was probably, without checking it out, the best grade we've given a center last season. So absolute monster game. That game, week 2 against the Browns, week 8 against Miami, week 15 against the Browns again, destroyed the Browns twice. You could easily come away with the opinion that Ryan Jensen is worth being the best center in the league, or at least, even if you saw some flaws in there, you're thinking, this guy's a stud, we're going to iron out those kinks, and we've got a dominant player on our hands. Problem is, there was like half a dozen games where he was outright bad in addition to those really good ones. So if you get the right or wrong mix of his play, you could think he's anything. That's what always fascinates me about the idea that seeing a whole complete slate of a guy, and it's going to be more important now when we come towards the draft, you can't just go from 4 games because you get the wrong slate of games with
just
the wrong guy.
Just looking at traits, Sam. Just looking at traits.
And it's bad.
I know.
You need the full picture. And the full picture, I don't think there's any way you could come to the conclusion that Ryan Jensen is worth being the best paid center in the league. I don't even know that you would come to the conclusion that he's better than the guy that played center for them last season. Interesting move.
Even part of that whole strategy, and we're getting down a rabbit hole again. Part of the whole strategy of picking 4 games, a lot of times is let's see him against the best player, right? Let me see him against the best nose tackle. Let me see him against Oakland's defensive front if you think that they're formidable. Let me see them against a big 340-pound nose tackle that we think is good, which is fine. But again, just because you play well against the good players, which is a good thing to do, right, doesn't mean that you play well against the bad players. And to be honest, the average to bad players, those games count just as much.
Of course they do.
And this comes back to that Robert Quinn argument a few years ago. He had that dominant 2013 season, which was incredible. We've referenced it a few times here. But he always got stoned that year against Joe Staley. So he had 2 games where he got completely shut down by Joe Staley, but he was beating up the Jermon Bushrods of the world for 12 pressures or whatever it was. But you know what? That's okay. I want a guy that when he gets a mismatch will crush that mismatch. So it's not always about how well you played. This was Olivier Vernon a couple years ago, too. Olivier Vernon, Joe Thomas just retired. Vernon had a lot of success against Joe Thomas. He actually had a couple sacks against him, but he never did anything against bad tackles. And this is why hashtag every snap matters, Sam. Every snap matters when you're looking at these guys, not just the ones against the Joe Thomases and the best nose tackles or whatever it might be.
Yeah, you assume logically that if you are doing your best against some elite competition, you're automatically destroying everybody else, because why wouldn't you? Those guys are worse. Of course you're better. But a lot of the times it isn't the case. You may have just happened to have the best games against those top competition, and you've never backed that up again. You've never done it before or since. And that was the thing years ago, when the Bengals were rotating their guards, and one of them was Evan Mathis and the other one was Nate Livings. And the Cowboys signed Nate Livings to a pretty significant free agent contract as a guard. And, one of their guys was talking about how they'd been through his tape and they'd looked at him against
Justin Smith, Haloti Ngata.
Yeah, a few of those top guys. And he'd been fantastic in all of them. And it was true. If you looked at his game-by-game grading again, you saw big spikes against Justin Smith, against Haloti Ngata, and the good guys they watched. The problem is that avoided all of his bad tape. And the problem with him is that there was way more bad than there was good. And by just focusing on what was an entirely logical way of doing it, if I can only watch 4 games, these are the 4 games I'm going to watch. But sometimes that leads you down the wrong hole. Now, I'm not saying they did this. For all I know, the Bucs watched every snap of his on tape and just think there's more potential there than they've seen from him.
He just
so
happens
far.
to be a guy, when you look at his breakdown,
Exactly,
there's a lot of good games, there's a lot of bad games.
But if you did do it this way, only pick 4 games, you could easily pick the wrong 4 games with Ryan Jensen and think he is an all-pro already.
Right. And so let me just sum it up by this. He had about 700 career snaps coming into the 2017 season. Mm-hmm. He played well over 1,000 snaps. He landed at a 74.9 overall grade, which doesn't sound great, but actually against all other centers last year was pretty good. It was actually the number 9 grade by PFF among centers. It was not a great year for centers last year in our grading. So he was a top half of the league center last year, top 10 center last year. So the contract doesn't look that bad from that angle, other than the fact that he's only got 1 year under his belt, which inherently makes it risky when you look at it going forward.
I don't think it's a terrible signing, but you're now paying a guy at the premium in his position, and we've never seen that he can get close to that, really, beyond like the sample size of 1 game.
Most importantly, though, offensive line Twitter is very upset. Ali Marpet has to move.
Darling.
He has to move positions.
Again.
By the way, he was the number 7 center at 79 overall.
Well, that was my point, is that I'm not sure he's even better than the guy he's going to be kicking out to guard by proxy.
But he has to move. He has to move again, and we all know that offensive linemen. So that's another rabbit hole I want to get down, that offensive linemen can't move positions.
Did you see the tweet? I sent it to you.
I did.
Tagged you in the tweet because it's way better than the analogies we've been using.
So we're talking about moving
offensive linemen that have to switch sides
from
left to right. Everyone assumes that's just an easy thing, and it isn't. It's more significant than you think. If you try and we've been trying to come up with a way of articulating that. If you think of, and one of the things people like to use is shooting right or left-handed in basketball.
No, that's not the case.
So that you don't like that one.
That's a terrible one.
Josh Sitton came up with our answer. He came up with the analogy, and he said that it's like wiping your ass with the other hand, the hand that you don't use. Entirely doable, but it's going to be awkward, and it's not going to be as efficient.
Yeah, but
that is switching sides.
So here's where I might disagree with it.
Don't disagree with it. It's perfect.
It's
analogy.
A great one. At some point, will you wipe your ass equally as well with your offhand? Because I do think NFL players have shown, if they've had success at right tackle and then they move to left or whatever it is, at some point they'll catch on and they'll be fine. So you think if you have enough time with your offhand, you're okay?
I think you could do it, but it's never going to be as comfortable. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but at some point you're going to fall into a comfort level on the offensive line. But
you're never going to become left-handed. You're going to get to the point where you can do it fine, and you're not, there's not a quantifiable material difference between the two, but you're going to know inside. Inside, you're going to know.
I'm not trying to lose this analogy because it's a fantastic one. But being an offensive lineman, you're not a lefty or righty offensive lineman.
Of course you are.
You're a lefty or righty writer.
Why would you not be?
No. You've been put into a position where you've been trained to do something one way, and then you train to do something a different way. It's like writing lefty and righty. I'm not going to become a good writer left-handed. That's not a good comparison.
Almost all people are inherently left or right side biased at something, right? Whether it's left or right-handed, left or right-footed in soccer, in people that do board-related things, skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding, they stand with a specific foot forward, and if you get the wrong one, you can't do it. The first time I went snowboarding, right, they asked me, which foot do you put forward? And I had no idea. I'd never done it before. Whatever one I guessed.
This is a good example.
This is perfect. This is a segment right here. Whatever one I guessed, it was the wrong one, right? So instead of going down the mountain in a nice smooth S shape, I was going down in like zigzag things that weren't working because I was stood the wrong way
first time
forward.
Down the mountain.
All I'm saying is offensive linemen are inherently going to be more natural doing things one way than another just by the nature of humanity. That's how the body works. Now, some will be able to do it fine and it'll never be an issue. Some will be able to get to that point, but it's not going to feel as natural. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, that's fine. Great. I'm a data-driven guy, though, and I see guys do it all the time. So I'm going to go by that.
There's also plenty of people that struggle when they make the change.
Yeah, but there's a difference between like discomfort versus this is impossible. O-linemen try to make it seem like this is impossible. They're trying to explain how
even O-line Twitter is not saying it's impossible. They're just saying it's a bigger deal.
They hate when people move positions. All right, Tampa Bay, another deal that they made. Vinny Curry coming in, a nice little movable chess piece for that defensive front. It feels like the Bucs have been building around Gerald McCoy, Levante David, maybe Brent Grimes now for years as like the only defensive playmakers on that defensive side of the ball. Robert Ayers came in, did some nice things. Is Curry simply Robert Ayers' replacement? Is he going to play that same type of role?
I think so, yeah. Robert Ayers really has been kind of criminally underrated for his entire career. I think he's another one of those guys who doesn't get the credit they deserve because they were a former first-round pick and therefore are forever seen as a bust.
He also peaked later in his career.
That's what I mean.
He was bad on that first.
When a guy
wasn't
comes
good on the
in
first
and
contract.
he's a first-round pick and they don't become a star, they're a bust.
Right.
And you will never crawl out of the shadow of being a bust, even if you become a pretty good player later on down the line.
Teams bust more than players bust, though, in my opinion. That's my hot take. This is in honor of Renner.
That's deep and philosophical. I like it.
Yeah. Like, it's not A.J. Jenkins' fault that the 49ers drafted him in the first round a couple years ago. It is not at all. It is the 49ers' fault. They busted, not A.J. Jenkins. He just rolled into the draft and was like, hey, I'm a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round receiver. That's just what I am. If you pick me in the first, that is your fault. That's how I view it.
What about guys that were really good and then play like crap?
Maybe they weren't really that good.
What if they were?
Then maybe they busted.
Yeah.
They just didn't develop. Most of the time, team's fault. Go ahead.
Okay.
Tell me about Robert Ayers and how you love him.
So Ayers is good, but he never gets the credit for that because he was a first-round pick that flamed out in Denver and just isn't going to get that credit. But he was the best player that they have put next to, alongside, around Gerald McCoy in several years of trying. Like, they've been trying to add productive defensive linemen to Gerald McCoy for years and have never been able to find anybody that can hold up. Ayers was at least producing and relatively productive. And I think just looking at Vinny Curry's grading and his profile and exactly how he was deployed at the Eagles, yeah, I think you're going to see a similar kind of thing, and he'll just pick up that slack. He's younger, but the same kind of player.
Robert Ayers has always been that Michael Bennett type of player, played base defensive end, beat up on guards in the pass game on nickel situations, rushing the passer. Ayers' grades are fascinating because they do back up, the fact that he just didn't live up to expectations as a first rounder. He did not have a grade over 80 until year 6 in the NFL. That was 2014, but since that point, he's been over 80 every single time. Last year, the highest grade of his career, 89.3. That was number 10 against edge defenders. So Ayers is a very good player. Curry, another guy that just didn't have massive opportunity until recently. And last year, 84.8, by far his highest grade of his career. So now the question is he peaking for, essentially going to the open market, or is he turning the corner?
And he's a great case to look past the sacks, because you look at it, if you're a Bucs fan, you look on the surface, 3 sacks last year, you're not exactly excited by that. But 3 sacks, 17 knockdowns of the quarterback. So he took the quarterback down, whether it's a sack or a hit, 20 times in the season. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
And 27 additional hurries. So pretty good PFF rushing grade, pretty good PFF run grade. Don't be bummed out by the 3 sacks thing, because like you said earlier, total pressures are a better predictor of future sacks than previous sacks are.
I said that on a separate video, so we need to reiterate it here. I know this is no, this is all blending together.
It really is.
Right?
Okay.
Because all we do is talk
as
all day.
Steve said earlier, future pressures.
Can I say it?
Okay, go. As Steve said earlier,
pressures predict future sacks. Sacks don't predict future sacks.
Yeah. So
pressures predict it better. I think that's T-shirt worthy.
Do you?
Yes. Send me a tweet at PFF_Steve if you would buy a T-shirt that said pressures. What? Pressures predict sacks. Sacks don't predict sacks.
So yeah, 3 sacks. Doesn't look pretty, but not a big deal because he had an absolute boatload of pressure in addition to those.
So Vinny, I think it's, if you want to go, show off to your friends, you're like, hey, Vinny Curry, great signing by the Bucs. He had 3 sacks last year. Next year, I predict he'll have 7, 8, 9.
So are you wearing your T-shirt as you're showing off at this point?
No, I would wear that. That's more it's more like next year.
Okay.
After he has a 9-sack season, you bust out the shirt and you're like, see, I told you. This is how I knew.
Okay.
And then your buddy's going to buy a T-shirt. And then he's going to do the same thing to his buddy. And now it's like this pyramid of T-shirts.
By the way, when we're talking about him replacing what Robert Ayers brought, that's an almost identical pressure profile for Ayers. 2 sacks this year, but the same 17 hits and 26 hurries.
So it's funny because a lot of times I don't even look.
27. There's 1 pressure between them, and one of Vinny Curry has one extra hurry and one extra sack compared to theirs, but otherwise they're exactly the same profile.
It's funny because sometimes I don't even look at those sack totals, and I have no problem telling you that Robert Ayers played well last year. Mm-hmm. And then I have no idea that it was only 2 sacks, and I think if people are just looking at your traditional box scores, they're like, dude, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
how did Ayers play well?
Combined had 5 sacks last year, but they actually both pressured the quarterback extensively.
Ayers always been a pretty solid run defender, but yeah, pass rushing over the last 4 years by far the best we've seen from him his entire career. So some moves for the Bucs. What else do we have? Sheldon Richardson. Let's discuss that one. Is this? I mean, Minnesota between Kirk Cousins, they definitely upgraded a quarterback. I think over Keenum. Adding Sheldon Richardson at a position where it feels like the Vikings haven't really had to address their defensive line in a few years now. Since they went out and got Linval Joseph along, in free agency. Yeah, they drafted Donnell Hunter, but they've been, Brian Robinson's been playing well for years. Everson Griffin, they went and got him a couple years ago. They haven't really had to address the defensive line, and now I think it is time for them to start replenishing, and Richardson's a good way to do it.
Well, what's interesting is, so they tried to draft defensive ends for years pretty high, and they kept swinging and missing on them, and then they got Griffin and Hunter lower down the draft. Robinson was a 4th-round pick as well, I think.
So that sounds right.
They've kind of struck on those edge guys lower down the draft. The only first rounder they really went hard for was Sharif Floyd, who looked like he was becoming a good player until knee injury struck him, and they appear to have kind of ended his career at this point. Then they went and got Joseph in free agency, and Sheldon Richardson, in theory, comes in to replace what they lost in Sharif Floyd, become that 3-tech pass rushing defensive tackle alongside Joseph, alongside those defensive ends. But Richardson is a strange kind of player because, like a couple of guys from that Jets defensive line, his best season was his second year in the league, where he looked like he was on his way to becoming a monster, a dominant interior defender, and it didn't happen. He then kind of declined, and he's never been as good as he was as a pass rusher that season. But again, he's another case where you have to look beyond the sacks, because Sheldon Richardson had 1 sack last year for the Seattle Seahawks.
The last 2 guys, yeah, this is the Vinny Curry, Robert Ayers story all over again.
1 sack, but he had 36 total pressures overall. So he actually has the highest number of pressures of any defender with 1 or fewer sacks.
So if you want to impress your friends, guys, you go out and bet your buddies that Sheldon Richardson's going to have 5 to 7 sacks next year.
We are just creating party pieces here.
Right?
This is a trivia night for somebody.
We're just trying to smarten up the crowd.
Yeah, so nobody in the league had more pressure having generated just 1 or a fewer sacks than Sheldon Richardson. So he was rushing the passer pretty well last season for the Seahawks. It just didn't show up in sack totals. And for like a 4-week stretch, week 10, 11, 12, 13, he was dominant. Like, he was crushing guys at that point. So I think we've seen from him in the past that he can be a dominant pass rusher. He can be a dominant run defender. We've rarely seen him put them both together in the same season. But if you put him on, there is a lot of talent there to work with on that defensive line. It should be an impact signing for them, given they're already good.
Back from a short technical difficulty.
What happened, Steve?
Doesn't matter what happened. We're back, and we're discussing Adrian Clayborn. Now, speaking of sacks, Sam,
yes.
We were just talking about sacks. Adrian Clayborn had a career-high 10 of them, 6 of them in one game, though. What do you think about Clayborn? He's signing with the New England Patriots as they look to revamp their defensive line.
Yeah, that game was ridiculous. We've said it before on the podcast. You and I were both doing analysis on that game. 12 total pressures, 6 sacks. Basically, every time they dropped back to pass, Adrian Clayborn was beating Chaz Green and later Byron Bell. It was interesting. So they benched Chaz Green, and Byron Bell was still getting his ass kicked, but he was at least able to slow down Adrian Clayborn.
Every now and again.
No. Almost every snap. It was just taking longer for Clayborn to get to the quarterback, but he was going to get there anyway.
That's what it is. 12 total pressures, 6 of which were sacks.
It was pretty amazing. I mean, we were talking before that I think Adrian Clayborn should buy Chaz Green something nice. You know the way running backs buy their offensive linemen a little gift for helping them get the yardage they got to, lead the league in rushing or whatever it was.
Thanks for the contract, Chaz.
Well, not just the contract, but he also helped him hit 2 different escalators.
The escalators.
In the course of the season for sacks. I think if he got if he got 6 sacks or something in the season, he triggered a bonus that got $250,000 or something like that. So in that one game, he got him the first escalator. But it also got him within touching distance of the second escalator, which kicked in when he got 10 sacks, which basically was never going to happen for Adrian Claiborne outside of this game. But he finished the season on 10 sacks. So Chaz basically got Adrian 2 escalators, which I think probably earned him like $1 million. I think that's worth.
So what are you buying?
I think that's worth a TV or an ATV maybe, or even a nice little watch.
You do love your watches.
I do.
Maybe the watch is the way to go. Send one to Chaz. For New England, one of their favorite pastimes, just stocking up on former first-round picks. And guys that I think Belichick really liked coming out back in the draft. I feel like he just does this as much as anyone else
Everybody
in the
does,
league.
Though. That's why you get crappy players signing big deals despite 5 years of awful play.
Everybody does that. It feels like Belichick's doing that more now. Remember Shea McClellan was like the future Patriot coming out of the draft, and they're like, oh, we'll just wait 5 years. So now they've got former first-rounder Adrian Claiborne. They just got traded for former first-rounder Danny Shelton. A couple of years ago, they bring in Shea McClellan, another former first-rounder. They're just stocking up on those guys along the defensive front, but much needed for New England. Claiborne coming off a career year, 85.5 overall grade, even though that's by far the highest of his career. 2015 and 16, he was at least trending better.
Yeah,
where his career's been going.
Even if you take out the Dallas game, it was still a career year for him. Like he was good overall as a pass rusher this past season, 50-something total pressures. Even if you take out the 12 that came against Dallas, it was still an overall pretty good season.
All right, one other key signing we have to discuss. The Baltimore Ravens, they go out and get Michael Crabtree in exchange for Ryan Grant. Did they just swap Ryan Grant out? Can we explain that situation real quick for the listeners?
Yeah. So Ryan Grant was one of the first wave of free agency deals. I think even in the legal tampering period, before free agency even opened, it was agreed to. It was a done deal. Only then it looked like, well, the Raiders are interested in Jordy Nelson, and if they get Jordy Nelson, they're going to cut Michael Crabtree. So Baltimore suddenly thought, ooh, we could get Michael Crabtree instead.
Yeah, we like him better than Ryan Grant.
And discovered a reason to make Ryan Grant's contract null and void, which was failing his medical. And this is a player that has never missed a game due to injury, had no obvious medical concerns, but with the availability of Michael Crabtree, suddenly developed a reason to fail his medical. Seems
a little sketchy. Seemed like the NFL needs to crack down on that stuff, or is it legit?
So it does seem very dodgy. It also seems kind of like something that doesn't really feel that legal. But I think part of the problem is how it's named, how it's termed.
Right.
When you hear fail medical, you think something acute that, you've done an X-ray and it turns out you're missing your left hip.
Like this guy can't even walk. We can't. Yeah. We obviously can't sign this guy. He can't even move.
Yeah, exactly. We've discovered something in his X-ray. This is a disaster. There's no way this guy can play football for us. Whereas what it really might be is they run the scans. They look through his medical history. They find something. And you're like, you know what? We don't sign players that have this injury history because it turns out that has a higher percentage of these guys getting injured, and we don't want to mess with that mid-season. So we just don't bring any of these guys in. And you see it sometimes pre-draft. Guys don't touch a player that have had this specific type of shoulder injury or whatever because there's a chance it recurs, and then you've wasted the draft pick. So maybe that's all it is. It would still be pretty coincidental timing in that they discovered this right at the point they wanted Michael Crabtree instead.
Yeah, right.
But I think when you take the label of failed a medical off it, it sounds less, iffy.
Right. With Crabtree, he's a middle of the pack wide receiver at this point in his career. A guy I feel like always leaves you wanting a little bit more. I liked his 2016 season. He was solid there. 2012 was the last time he was up in that elite receiver type of range. But, he gets open. He's okay after the catch if you give him the short passes and all that fun stuff. Either way, he's an upgrade to what Baltimore's had. He's a guy on the possession receiver end of the spectrum that I think at least helps in Baltimore.
Average receiver upgrades crappy receiving core.
Creep back toward average, even in your receiving core as well. It's not just offensive lines, Sam.
No.
But Baltimore's still in the market for more dynamic options or just hoping and praying for Rashad Perriman's health for him to become that deep option. All right, we've got some quarterback carousel discussion.
We got music, carousel music.
We definitely need some carousel music because it's the off season. Quarterbacks are moving left and right, and this time it's about the draft and draft positioning. So it's the New York Jets trading from number 6 up to number 3 with the Indianapolis Colts in exchange for 3 second-round picks. Feels like a huge haul.
Yeah.
To move up 3 spots. And I just want to give you a little insight because we're going to discuss it in a second here. But our friends over at the PFF Forecast, that's FORE Cast, PFF Forecast, the newest podcast by PFF, they're going to quantify this trade. They're going to put some hard numbers behind this trade, what it means for the Colts, what it means for the Jets, who won, who truly lost from a pure number standpoint. So go check those guys out, that new podcast. They deserve your subscription. Just go subscribe, listen to it, and I think you'll enjoy it. They do a really good job. What?
You seem very earnest there. It was commanding.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to order people around. I highly suggest that you guys go and subscribe to the PFF Forecast because I think it's outstanding. They do really good work. So they're going to quantify it. We're going to give our takes on it. What are your thoughts on Colts moving down and Jets moving up?
For the Colts, I think it makes perfect sense. They're not in the quarterback market. They've got Andrew Luck and his busted shoulder, and they've got Jacoby Brissett behind him. They're good. They're not taking a QB at 3, so they've got no problem with moving down to 6, assuming that 3 QBs may get taken in the first 3 anyway, so they're basically in the same position, and they've got 3 extra second-round picks for doing so. For the Jets, I think it makes sense for them as well. Everybody in that building is kind of in save your job mode rather than, build for the future or look long term. They're in try and find a QB right now because we need one. They've already taken a shot at Teddy Bridgewater. I think that's a good gamble to make because of all the reasons we talked about before.
Yeah, I like that.
They brought Josh McCown back in case it turns out that's a bad move. And they're going to have a third roll of the dice in drafting one of the top quarterbacks available. And like I say, so they've got essentially two gambles working, and then they have a fail-safe option in Josh McCown in case both of those turn out to be busted flushes.
So you've been generally upset with the concept of moving up to just get any of the quarterbacks versus a specific quarterback. Do you have any issues with the Jets moving to 3, which is a lot different than moving to 1 and 2 when you can narrow down the search?
It's not a Jet-specific complaint, and it's more a complaint of how this stuff is covered. That, there's the Jets moving around, the Bills are moving, jockeying for position. All these teams are positioning themselves to chase after a quarterback in the draft. But people say that, get one of these quarterbacks as if they're all interchangeable and it doesn't make any difference which one you get. As long as you get one of the quarterbacks, you're fine. Even though they're wildly different players, they have vastly different talent, skill sets, expectations. The chances are, with the hit rate of quarterbacks in the NFL, at least half of, even if you limit it to the top 4, at least half of those 4 guys are going to crap out. They're going to be busts. And teams are going to have wildly different interpretations as to which 2 are the 2 guys that have any shot of succeeding at the next level. So when teams are moving around, they're not just putting themselves in a position that as long as we get any of those guys, we're okay. Like, they have specific targets in mind and a specific ranking and hierarchy and grading of these guys. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal.
Well, come draft day, they're going to say that they got their guy.
Obviously.
No, in reality, though, I don't think it's crazy. I do think it depends on your evaluations. I don't think it's crazy to think that the Jets or any team that moves up to 3 can at least have 3 guys with comparable grades. Now, you're certainly going to have your first guy that you think is a perfect fit, skill-wise, you're building, and all that fun stuff. But even in our rankings currently, as PFF as a whole, it's Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, and we have them all slotted as guys we would take in the top 5. Now then, there's a drop off, which there are other guys that we like in the first round who would be less likely to take in the top 5. So in our world, I like Baker, Darnold, then Rosen. I'd be okay with Rosen at 3. I'd rather Baker, but I'd be okay with Rosen at 3. So I can see them playing it from that perspective at least.
What makes this interesting to me is that our jobs aren't dependent on this one evaluation of quarterbacks. Whereas when you're talking about NFL franchises, that is the case for a lot of these guys.
It's a different dynamic, yeah.
If they swing and a miss with the top quarterback in this draft that they need to get, these guys are getting fired. They're getting kicked out of the building. If that was the case, it would seem that you would move heaven and earth to get your number 1 guy on the list because the strike rate on quarterbacks is so bad that you have to be looking for the one guy that you think, if anybody is going to succeed, it's going to be this guy. The other two, sure, they're close, but I mean, we're way more confident in this guy than we are the others.
Oh yeah, even the way I said that was like I'd be happy enough with Rosen, but man, I would much rather have Donald or Baker.
If you felt that way about any of these quarterbacks, it seems strange that you wouldn't be trying everything in your power to get to the position where you guarantee the guy that you want. Now maybe there are, but it's all sort of information and subterfuge behind the scenes. We're pretty sure that so we're just working on the basis of you have no idea what's happening on 1 and 2, and you're now sitting at 3 hoping that your guy lasts. But maybe there's all kinds of feelers out, and we're pretty sure these are the 2 guys that are going 1 and 2. We're reasonably certain our guy's going to fall to 3 anyway. Maybe they think they're put themselves in the position to get their guy in the first place without having to give up whatever else it would cost going from 3 to 1. But, just from the outside in isolation, you think you would have to try and get the guy that you think is capable of doing it, not just a consolation prize when everything is on the line.
So the only other dynamic at play, and Chase Stewart, who works for various publications, and he's a Jets fan, and he was tweeting out essentially how you move up, and he mentioned what you said, the hit rate for quarterbacks isn't good, and you're moving up for essentially a 20% chance that this number 3 quarterback off the board is going to be really good, and you're working against history. And he essentially listed all these things in a tweet that made it bad for the Jets. And the one thing I think he failed to mention is just when you give up those 3 second-round picks, it's your roster gets worse. Okay, so your roster around this quarterback is going to get worse before it gets better. I'm not saying you're playing with fire. You just have to know what you're getting into. Yes, you have to go get the guy, all that stuff. Your job's dependent on it, whatever. Just know that the roster is going to get worse before it gets better, much like I was saying with the Julio trade years ago. You go up, get Julio, you lose all these draft picks. The roster got worse before it got better. Just understand what you're getting into.
But that's why I don't think it's bad for the Jets to make this move, is that, yes, they're giving up a lot for a small chance of hitting on a quarterback that becomes the franchise quarterback. But if you find the franchise quarterback, all of the other problems essentially go away for the next 10 years. You can have a bad roster around a good quarterback and still contend pretty easily. The Colts did it for years. They had this bad Colts roster thing is not a new thing, and Andrew Luck was still able to haul this franchise to the playoffs multiple times. And when he goes down, suddenly, oh, look at this roster. It's terrible. Like, it didn't change. It was awful when he was leading it to the postseason, but that's what a franchise quarterback can do for you.
You might not even know you have the guy, because you might have the Jared Goff situation too, because we think he's a franchise guy now after he was in the right system. When he was in the wrong system with bad supporting cast, he looked like a dud himself.
But the point is, if the Jets strike on that quarterback, it doesn't matter that it just costs them a lot and that the roster is going to take a hit over the next couple of years, because you're going to have a franchise quarterback in the building for the next 10 or for the next 15 or however long it takes for him to hang it up. Because unlike other positions, you basically don't let franchise quarterbacks hit free agency unless you are prepared to get rid of them. So the Redskins, for example, or Kirk Cousins, clearly were never convinced that Cousins was a franchise quarterback. They were willing to kind of keep him on the line for one season or whatever and let it roll, and just on the off chance that he showed conclusively who's a franchise quarterback, but really they were never sold on it. But for any other team, you just pay them what they want. That's how it works. If you need to franchise them and keep them around, you'll do that. But, eventually Aaron Rodgers will get his new blockbusting, mind-bending contract. That's how it works. You don't let those guys leave the building until they're done with playing, or you are convinced that they're done with playing and you move on from them. So if this hurts the Jets roster composition for the next 2 years, they're fine with that, because year 3, 4, 5, they've still got the franchise quarterback that can then use the roster that is building.
Just know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. So like I said, friends over at the PFF Forecast, they'll have their own little breakdown and use some numbers to break down this trade as well. So I hinted a little bit earlier to discuss a little bit about PFF grades, the way the media is using them, the way fans use them, and all that stuff.
Is this where you break out your text?
Oh, I have, let me just see how many text messages I have. 48 text messages from people around the league who think PFF is awesome.
Okay.
Is that how this works?
Yeah.
There we go. PFF's awesome.
They all came in just during this podcast recording as well.
They did. They heard us live podcasting, and they were like, we just want to reiterate our love for PFF. Now, honestly, though, I think what's happened a lot of times is people get upset when they just get PFF grades thrown at them, and this is what we've run into quite a bit. They're not mad at PFF. They're mad at people just throwing one number at their face and saying, well, PFF says, and here's this number. And by the way, we love that number. We think the number's fantastic. We think it's a great way to at least encapsulate a player. But getting the full story on the player is still the most important thing, right?
One number will never be able to answer. It will never be able to tell the full story on any player, ever. It's never going to happen, whether it's the overall PFF grade for last season, whether it's the overall PFF grade for his career, whether, one number is never going to do it. You're going to need additional context, even if it's just snap counts, even if it's just how that grade was broken down. Like we said with Ryan Jensen, it was all over the shop. That's going to shake out to whatever it was, a 78 or something.
Right. Or just pass block versus run block.
But how did
categories.
That 78 come about? Was it all the breakdown? You're never going to get it done with one number. So when people just go, this guy was a 74, he sucks, that would annoy you. It annoys us. That's not the way to do it.
And if they had said 74, the context you're missing there actually is he was the 9th graded center, Ryan Jensen.
Yeah.
So it isn't, it's in relation to other guys, all these different things. So my point is, Sam, this is why I'm really excited about us bringing premium back, because, look, we had a lot of internal battles here at PFF. We did not want to take premium stats back from a lot of fans because it was the best way for fans to get educated. Yeah. It's still by far, in my opinion, very biased, but my opinion, by far the best way for fans to be opinionated about players, teams, skill sets, and especially positions that don't normally get love, like the offensive line, like the defensive line, linebackers, you look beyond tackles, all these different things. The best way to get educated when you're using the full tool.
There's a bunch of different reasons for PFF existing, for PFF doing what it does, and obviously one of them is making money. But one of the big motivating factors behind me doing what I do and on the consumer side of things is I want to raise the level of debate surrounding football.
Right.
So when we talk about stuff like look beyond the sacks, don't come at me with a guy having 2 sacks when I can show you that he also had 17 hits and 26 hurries.
Right.
It's more than that. And we start quantifying how much more is that worth, and we can put values on that and all this kind of stuff. Step by step, we are raising the level of debate to get beyond a point where people just go, well, he had 3 sacks, he sucks. And it takes a while, but premium is a great tool for doing that because, we've been sitting here doing it right now. Look, we knew off the top of our heads that Robert Ayers and Vinny Curry were better than their sack numbers indicated, but the premium stat shows you exactly the numbers. It shows you how much better because they only had 5 sacks between them, but they had an absolute boatload of quarterback hits and hurries. And particularly with hits, the difference between a hit and a sack can just be whether the quarterback got the ball out of his hands. It's nothing to do with the defender. I mean, he's in exactly the same place. The QB just makes the difference between those statistical categories. So, yeah, premium, I think, is a great tool for adding the context to that one number that pisses everybody off when it gets thrown at them.
Yes. So that's, this stuff comes up every now and again. And people like to poo-poo the single grade sometimes. And honestly, I don't blame them sometimes. If I was, a reporter or an analyst or whatever it is, and people are just throwing this one PFF number at me over and over and over again and saying, just listen to this, I'd probably get a little pissed off as well. But I do think if you have premium and you're getting the full PFF experience, now you're leading those discussions. You're leading the charge. You've got more party fodder there, Sam. You got more party. I mean, you're like, man, DeForest Buckner was awesome last year. I know he only had 4 sacks, but let me show you why he was awesome.
I'm going to forget this. So remember to never invite me to one of your parties. Because
my parties, they're great.
I don't think that I would have fun.
We have trivia.
Yeah.
We have PFF premium
that's
trivia.
Specifically what I'm looking to avoid.
Ginger ale. It's just, it's a beautiful time.
So the other thing that comes up is, somebody put on Twitter that at its heart, PFF is just a bunch of guys putting a subjective take on what happened in a play, and it's no different to anybody else's opinion. It's just your subjective opinion versus this subjective opinion. And there's a kernel of truth in that, but the point I would make on that is that by giving you the full picture, like we said with Ryan Jensen's season grade, by doing it for every single play in every single game across the entire league, unless you're doing that as well, then our opinion is better than yours because it's more complete. Not because our opinion is more valuable than yours in and of itself, but because we're applying it to every single play. You're just looking at a game, however many games you're looking at a less complete picture than the one we're giving you. So maybe you're looking at Ryan Jensen's 4 games that make him look like an all-pro, at which point our opinion is more valuable than yours because we've given you the other 12 games of a season that add more to that picture.
Right.
Our opinion is not inherently more valuable because we're smarter than you or we're better than you. It's because we have a business set up where we can go through and look at every single one of these plays in 256 regular season NFL games.
Correct.
However many extra in the playoffs. I can't do that math on the fly. Whatever else we've got in the FBS, which is another like 900 games.
267 in the NFL, yeah.
We're doing all of that because you don't have the time to. So it's not that we're smarter than you. It's that we just have more free time on our hands because we're a business that does this.
Right. And look, a lot of the most valuable insights about PFF, it's not about what has a guy done, it's about what is he going to do. And if a guy has a great grade, again, is it, well, he did it all against the run. And you know what? We're not going to overpay this guy who's just a run defender. And that's where a lot of the other context must come into play too. So bottom line, Premium Stats gives you the context you need to kind of back up the grades using all of the PFF tools, whether it's the draft guide, the QB annual, the free agent guide, Premium Stats, player grades. You put those all together. Now you're getting a very complete picture on players around the NFL.
So basically what we're telling you is you get yourself Premium Stats. You sign up for
PFF Elite.
You get yourself Premium Stats. And when a reporter says something stupid, you don't just come back with him, but with the one number, right? Not the overall grade. That's
Fire everything at him.
Yes. You hit him with everything in Premium Stats to point out that he's stupid. That's how you do it.
I want it all fired at him. Yes. So I want you guys to be smart. I want you guys to
smart and aggressive with the PFF stats.
You guys take the reins for us, and you guys police things for us.
Aggressive and diverse.
I like it.
That's the strategy we're going with here.
And don't let any. And just by the way, we do literally sit down with teams and act as consultants for them when they're looking for players in free agency in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And it's at 30 right now of those NFL teams. Not every team's using us to the same level,
officially.
But officially there's 30. There might be more. We'll let you guys know when it all comes down. But we work around the NFL. So,
well, also,
my spiel's over, Sam.
Okay, I got one more and then we're done.
Okay.
We don't have, you guys don't know because you don't have ex-players, ex-coaches, ex-front office people on staff.
But we do.
Actually, all 3.
Yeah.
Right currently in PFF on staff are former players, former coaches, and former front office executives. So,
correct.
In fact, all of the things you say don't exist in PFF actually exist. Those guys are all putting the grades together. That's it. I'm done. I'm out.
And we're done. We'll be back later in the week. We'll go back to a lot more draft content. Go get Elite because we just sold the heck out of it for the last 10 minutes, but also get Edge as well. If you can't get Elite, go get Edge. It's got all the guides. They're all coming out. And subscribe to the YouTube channel if you guys are watching on it right now. And if you guys haven't subscribed to the PFF Forecast, go do that as well on your podcast machine. Thanks, guys. We'll talk again next week.